Deep in the forbidden wilderness of the Ural Mountains, there are structures that defy history. We're talking about megalithic stone walls rising 20 meters into the air, built from blocks weighing over 100 tons each. The surface of these stones is not just smooth, it is polished to a mirror finish, with edges so precise that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. Mainstream science and geology textbooks will tell you these are natural formations, the result of weathering, erosion, and millions of years of wind. But let's be honest, nature does not create perfect 90-degree angles. Nature does not polish granite until it looks like glass, and it certainly does not stack blocks in complex geometric patterns. Someone built these walls, and then someone or something destroyed them, leaving behind only the shattered ruins of a forgotten metropolis. They buried the evidence of this advanced civilization under layers of earth and thick taiga forest, and then they lied to us, claiming these are just rocks. By the end of this investigation, you will discover who really walked these lands before us, what terrifying technologies they possessed, and why they were wiped off the face of the earth so thoroughly that even their legends have been erased. Do you believe a high-tech civilization existed in the north long before recorded history? Let me know in the comments. The story begins on August 9, 2007, when a veteran topographer named Igor Belov received a classified assignment. His mission was to map a highly restricted, hard-to-reach sector of the northern Urals near the infamous Manpupuner Plateau. Belov was not an amateur. At 47 years old, with a wife who taught history and a son studying geophysics, he was a man of science. He had 23 years of experience in the geodetic service, having mapped over 1,000 kilometers of the harshest terrain on Earth. He knew the Urals better than anyone, but this specific sector, he had never set foot there. Until 1991, it was a black zone, a Soviet restricted area completely off-limits to civilians. After the fall of the Union, it became a ghost territory, forgotten by the government and uninhabited by man. On the morning of August 8th, a helicopter dropped Belov and his two assistants, Sergei and Andrew, into a small clearing. They had tents, equipment, and enough rations for 2 weeks. The plan was simple: hike through the dense taiga to the ridge, map the anomalies, and return. The first 3 days were standard survival, fighting through thick forest, navigating swamps, and scaling rocky slopes. At night, they drank tea by the fire, ate canned meat, and joked about keeping watch for bears. But on August 11th, at 11:40 a.m., everything changed. The group stumbled upon a massive crevice, a deep tear in the bedrock, 15 meters wide, stretching north as far as the eye could see. Belov pulled out his tablet to check the official government maps. Coordinates: 54 degrees north, 61 degrees east. The map showed a flat plateau. No crack, no canyon, nothing. Sergei rappelled down first. His altimeter read a depth of 23 meters. Suddenly, his voice echoed up from the darkness, sounding distorted and frantic. Belov and Andrew quickly descended after him. What they found at the bottom was not natural debris. The floor of the crevice was covered in massive stone fragments, but they weren't scattered chaotically like a landslide. They were stacked in rows. Each block was the size of a sedan. The surfaces were unnaturally smooth, free of chips or cracks. Belov crouched down and ran his bare hand over a slab. It was freezing, cold as ice, even though the midday sun should have warmed the stone. But the texture was the real shock. It wasn't rough like natural granite. It felt synthetic, almost like polished concrete or glass. On the side of the block, he found tool marks, thin laser straight lines running parallel to each other. He measured them. The distance between each line was exactly 2 meters. No margin of error. Nature does not work in exact metrics. Wind and water do not carve parallel lines with mathematical precision. This was a tool mark, something like a giant industrial saw or a laser cutter. But what kind of machine leaves marks like that on solid granite in the middle of nowhere? Andrew called out from a few yards away. He had found a second stone. On this one, the lines crossed at a 45-degree angle, forming a perfect geometric grid. Belov snapped a photo, the camera flash reflecting off the stone as if it were a mirror. They walked along the dark corridor of the crevice for 200 meters. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of industrial processing. Some blocks had perfect 90-degree corners. Others had smooth, calculated arcs. It was as if someone had sliced through the mountain like it was butter. Then Sergei stopped dead in his tracks. He pointed to a massive fractured block. "Look, at the corner," he whispered. Something was glinting in the shadows. Belov moved in closer. Embedded in the solid rock was a metal object. It was round, flat, about the size of a dinner plate, 20 centimeters in diameter and a centimeter thick. The color was a dark matte black with a strange greenish hue. Belov tried to pry it loose with his hands, but it was fused to the rock. Sergei grabbed a crowbar from his pack. It took 15 minutes of heavy leverage before the disc finally gave way with a high-pitched metallic screech.
Belov weighed it in his hand, roughly 1.4 kilograms. But the detail was what captivated him. The surface wasn't scratched. It was engraved with extreme precision. The grooves were exactly 1.5 millimeters deep, smooth and clean, as if cut by a CNC machine. The symbols on the disc were unlike anything they had ever seen. Not Cyrillic, not Latin, not runes. They were geometric shapes connected by intricate lines, circles, triangles, spirals, repeating in a complex fractal pattern. And there was something else. As Belov held the disc, a numbing cold crept up his fingers. The air temperature in the canyon was a warm 82 degrees Fahrenheit, but the disc felt like it had been pulled out of a deep freezer. Andrew placed a thermometer on the metal. It read 39 degrees Fahrenheit. How can a piece of metal maintain a temperature 40 degrees lower than its environment without a power source? The laws of thermodynamics say everything seeks thermal equilibrium. This object was violating the laws of physics. Belov bagged the artifact, his mind racing. They continued down the crevice and found 2 more blocks with similar metal inserts, but these were buried too deep to extract. That night, they camped at the bottom of the canyon. No fire, just cold rations and silence. Belov examined the disc under a flashlight. It formed a diagram, a central circle, rays shooting out to the edges, triangles pointing outward, and clockwise spirals between the rays. "It looks like a star map," Sergei muttered. Belov squinted. It resembled a constellation chart, but the star placement didn't match any known sky on Earth. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in his sleeping bag, staring into the abyss above, haunted by one question: who left this here? And what kind of weapon could destroy a civilization so thoroughly that only these fragments remained? On August 12, they climbed out of the fissure to survey the area from higher ground. Beloff hiked up a nearby hill, rising 250 meters above the tree line. The view was a sea of green taiga stretching to the horizon. But a kilometer to the north, the pattern of the forest broke. The trees were growing in unnatural straight lines, forming perfect rectangular patches. Beloff raised his binoculars. His heart stopped. Rising out of the earth among the trees were massive gray monoliths. They were uniform, oriented perfectly to the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. They looked like the foundations of a colossal city. He signaled Sergei and Andrew. They sprinted toward the anomaly. 40 minutes later, they were standing in the middle of the impossible. These weren't just rocks. They were manufactured blocks, 10 meters high, 15 wide, and 25 long. Despite the moss, the straight architectural edges were unmistakable. There were 30 of them, arranged in 3 perfect rows of 10. The spacing between the rows, exactly 50 meters. The spacing between the blocks, exactly 20 meters. It was military precision. Beloff wiped the moss from the nearest monolith. Dark gray, polished granite, cool and damp. At eye level, there was a ledge, a rectangular groove cut into the stone, running the entire length of the block. It looked like a mounting point for a panel or a wall that was no longer there. Sergei checked the next block. Same groove, same height, same orientation. This was a standardized construction system. Andrew climbed to the top of a monolith and yelled down. The top was flat, with square recesses cut into the corners, 1 meter by 1 meter, likely for columns or towers. Beloff climbed into one of the pits. Vertical walls, flat bottom, machine-perfect precision. They spent the entire day documenting the site, measuring, photographing, recording coordinates. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the site, Beloff climbed the hill one last time. In the twilight, the soil between the blocks revealed a different color, darker lines connecting the structures. He dug into the earth with his knife. A few inches down, he hit stone. A paved road? Or a grid of energy conduits? The blocks were connected by underground slabs, forming a single massive complex covering an area the size of 2 football fields. In the Siberian wilderness, in a place where history books say only primitive hunter-gatherers lived. Beloff sat on the ground, pouring tea from a thermos, his hands shaking. He had spent his life mapping the wild. He knew what nature looked like. This was engineering. Someone had quarried granite, polished it, transported it, and assembled a complex using technology that rivaled or exceeded modern capabilities. Sergei sat next to him. "They didn't teach us this in school," he whispered. "This was a civilization, a global one. And they tell us our ancestors were chasing mammoths with sticks while someone was building this?" Andrew checked the GPS. The digital map was blank. No ruins, no settlements, just empty green pixels. Beloff pulled the mysterious disc out of his pack. In the dying light, he held it up against the layout of the ruins. The central circle on the disc aligned with the center of the complex. The rays pointed to the corner monoliths. The spirals matched the blocks in between. It wasn't just a star map. It was a blueprint, a schematic of the very facility they were standing in.
That night, Belov wrote in his journal, "Artificial origin confirmed, age unknown, technology incompatible with historical timeline, immediate archaeological intervention required." The next morning, they returned to the crevice and found 3 more artifacts: a smaller disc, a rectangular plate with a complex grid, and a tool-like object with a maple leaf-shaped tip, all made of the same freezing black-green metal. Belov packed them carefully. He knew he was carrying something that would shatter the timeline of human history. The extraction helicopter arrived on August 18. 4 hours later, they were back in Yekaterinburg. Belov went straight home. His wife, Olga, met him at the door. He didn't say a word. He walked to the table and slammed the heavy metal disc down. Olga picked it up, her eyes widening at the symbols. "What is this?" she asked. He told her everything. The laser cuts, the grid city, the impossible thermodynamics. "Show it to the institute. Let the experts see this." On August 19, Belov walked into the Department of Archaeology at the Ural Federal University to meet Professor Gromov, the region's top expert on prehistoric cultures. Belov laid out the photos, the coordinates, the data. Gromov listened, frowning, skeptical. Then Belov placed the disc on the desk. The professor picked it up, turned it over, and held it to the light. He went silent. For 5 long minutes, the only sound in the office was the ticking of a clock. Finally, Gromov spoke. This is impossible. The metal composition is unknown. The symbols don't match any script in human history. And the machining. We can't do this today." Belov felt a surge of hope. "When do we start the excavation?" Gromov's face darkened. He shook his head. "Not so fast, Igor. We need permits, funding, clearance from the nature reserve, government approval. This will take months." Belov pushed back. "We can't wait. This changes everything." Gromov promised to pull strings, but asked to keep the disc for preliminary analysis. Belov agreed, took a receipt, and left, believing the truth would finally come out. A week passed. Then the phone rang. It was Professor Gromov, but the voice on the other end didn't sound like the arrogant academic from the week before. It sounded terrified. He asked Belov to come to the university immediately. Something had gone wrong. Something had gone very wrong. Belov rushed out the door, unaware that the real danger was just beginning. Professor Gromov sat in his office, his face pale as a sheet. The mysterious black disc lay on the table between them, next to a stack of fresh lab reports. He pushed the papers toward Igor Belov without saying a word. Igor scanned the data, and his stomach dropped. The spectrographic analysis was impossible. The metal was an alloy, 42% iron, 38% titanium, 12% chromium, with traces of vanadium, molybdenum, and nickel. This wasn't just rare, it was chronologically impossible. Titanium alloys of this grade didn't exist in ancient history. They didn't exist at all until the mid-20th century aerospace industry developed them. Yet the radiocarbon dating of the organic material fused to the disk surface told a different story. 7,000 years old, give or take 3 centuries. Let that sink in. 7,000 years ago, long before the pyramids of Giza, when humans were supposedly just figuring out agriculture, someone in the Ural Mountains created a high-grade aerospace titanium alloy, machined it with laser-like precision, engraved it with fractal geometry to a depth of 0.5 millimeter, and embedded it into a megalithic granite block weighing 100 tons. That's impossible, Gromov whispered, staring at the wall. The machines are wrong, or this is a forgery. Forgery, Igor snapped. Professor, I pulled this out of solid granite. That rock hasn't been touched in millennia. The lichen growth alone proves it. Gromov shook his head violently. Then I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know. He slid the disk back across the table. Further research is pointless. These results contradict every archaeological model we have. If I publish this, the Academy will destroy me. They'll call it a hoax. My career, the department's funding, it will all be gone. Forget you found this, Igor. Bury it. Igor walked out of the university into the hot August sun, but his blood ran cold. Academic science had just slammed the door in his face. They weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in protecting the narrative. He needed someone who didn't care about tenure or reputation. He needed a rogue. He got into his car and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Alexei Rybin, a 72-year-old retired geologist who had been exploring the Urals since the 1950s. If anyone knew the secrets of the mountains, it was him. They met that evening in Rybin's cramped apartment on the outskirts of Yekaterinburg. The place smelled of stale tobacco and old paper.
Maps covered every inch of the walls, and shelves groaned under the weight of geological samples. Igor poured everything out: the canyon, the grid city, the impossible alloy, and the professor's cowardice. Rybin listened in silence, smoking cheap cigarettes, the blue smoke drifting up to the ceiling. When Igor finished, the old man stood up, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a yellowed, dusty folder. "I knew it," he muttered. "I always knew someone would find it again." He opened the folder on the kitchen table. Inside were maps, not modern ones, but military surveys from 1938. Rybin pointed stained finger at the exact coordinates of Igor's discovery. There, in red pencil, was a warning: anomalous zone, access restricted. The signature was illegible. In 1938, they already knew. They surveyed it, marked it, and then wiped it. He pulled out a second map, this one from 1946. Same area, but now it was labeled Object Number 17, Special Importance. A red circle with a 15-kilometer diameter marked the exclusion zone. Then Rybin showed a third map from 1951. The area was blank. No markings, no warnings, just empty forest. It was as if the site had been erased from reality. "Where did you get these?" Igor asked. Rybin crushed his cigarette and stared out the window at the city lights.
I have a theory, he said slowly. It sounds crazy, but it's the only thing that fits. There was a civilization here, a global one. They had industrial technology, stone cutting, metallurgy, energy grids. They built these cities thousands of years ago. Then something happened. A war, a cataclysm. They were wiped out. The cities were pulverized, buried under mud and forests. When we found the ruins in the 20th century, the Soviet leadership panicked. Acknowledging this civilization would destroy the official history of the world. It would mean rewriting everything: evolution, technology, religion. It was easier to hide it. Rybin looked Igor in the eye. You need more proof. Go to the State Archive, dig deeper. On August 22nd, Igor walked into the State Archive building on Vinera Street. It smelled of dust and bureaucracy. He filled out a request form for topographic surveys of the northern Urals, trying to look like a boring academic. The librarian handed him 3 folders of maps from the early 20th century. He opened the first one, a map of the Perm province from 1876. He scanned the familiar rivers and mountains until his finger stopped on the forbidden zone. There, in tiny, elegant handwriting, was a label, Stone City. Below it, a note, ruins of unknown origin. Locals avoid this place. Igor froze. In the 19th century, it wasn't a secret. They called it Stone City. He opened the 1912 map. The label was gone, just the mountain range. He opened the 1924 map, blank. The erasure of history happened in real time, decade by decade. He went back to the librarian. Do you have anything older? 18th century? 17th century? She shook her head. Restricted access. You need authorization from the director. Igor demanded a meeting. 10 minutes later, a man appeared. Stanislaw Terentiev, the archive director, 58 years old, with the sharp eyes of a man who knows too much. Igor played his cards. He showed Terentiev the photos of the blocks, the disc, the analysis. I know about the Stone City. I know about the cover-up. Terentiev looked at the photos without emotion. Then he stood up, locked the door, and walked to a safe in the corner of his office. He pulled out a heavy leather folder and placed it on the desk. What I am about to show you, he said quietly, technically does not exist. These maps were removed from public circulation in 1937. He opened the folder. Inside was a parchment map dated 1792, drawn by Ivan Herman. The detail was incredible. Terentiev pointed to the northern Urals. In red ink, the map maker had marked 3 distinct sites. The first was labeled Great Stone City. The note read, walls high as a fathom, gates destroyed, interior empty. The second site, 50 kilometers east, 12 stone pillars arranged in a circle taller than a bell tower. The third site, 70 kilometers south, underground chamber, entrance blocked. Locals fear it.
In the 18th century, these weren't rumors, they were landmarks. He pulled out a second map, dated 1821. This one was from the expedition of Alexander von Humboldt, the famous German scientist invited by the Tsar. Humboldt had marked the same sites but gave them scientific names: Megalithic Complex 1, Stone Pillar Arrangement, and Subterranean Structure. Humboldt's notes were in Latin, but Terentieff translated them. Clearly artificial, technology unknown, age undetermined but significant, detailed study recommended. Then came the smoking gun, a letter from Humboldt to the Berlin Academy of Sciences, dated September 21, 1821. He describes taking samples of stone and metal for analysis. The results? Iron, titanium, chromium, the exact same alloy Igor had tested. Humboldt wrote, "The composition is unusual. The smelting requires temperatures impossible for our furnaces." Igor felt the room spinning. 200 years ago, a German scientist found the same ruins, tested the same impossible metal, and reached the same conclusion. And then, silence. After Humboldt's report, Terentieff explained, the imperial government classified the findings. Maps were altered. Samples were confiscated. The official excuse was strategic mineral deposits. The real reason? These ruins didn't fit the timeline. They proved that history was wrong. It was easier to erase the past than to explain it. "Why are you showing me this?" Igor asked. "You're breaking protocol." Terentieff smiled, a sad, tired smile. "What protocol? The empire has gone. The Soviet Union has gone. These secrets are guarding a corpse. Formally, these documents are declassified, but no one asks for them because no one knows they exist. But you found the site again. That means the cycle is starting over." "Cycle?" Igor asked. "Every 100 years or so, someone stumbles upon the stone city. They find the metal, they ask questions, and then they disappear. Be careful, Igor. You are not the first to look for the builders of the Urals, but you might be the first to survive what comes next." Terentieff lit a cigarette, the blue smoke curling toward the high ceiling of his office. "It's not that these things don't exist," he said softly. "It's that we are not allowed to remember them." He began to speak, his voice filled with the weight of 38 years in the archives. He had seen thousands of classified documents, maps, survey reports, diaries of 18th century explorers. Slowly, a picture had emerged. A massive, technologically advanced civilization had once spanned the Urals and Siberia. They left behind stone cities, underground complexes, and road networks that defy modern engineering. Then they vanished overnight. No mass graves, no signs of plague, just empty cities left to the wind. Centuries later, new tribes arrived, Slavs, Turks, and found these ruins, creating legends about giants and underground dwellers to explain what they saw. Russian pioneers in the 16th century recorded these sites on maps. Imperial scientists in the 19th century studied them, but every time the conclusions were too dangerous for the official timeline. The Soviet government simply continued the policy: classify, restrict, destroy. Terentieff stubbed out his cigarette and looked Igor in the eye. "I've been waiting a long time for someone to ask the right questions. Someone who wouldn't just look, but see." Igor asked to copy the maps. Terentieff nodded. For 2 hours, Igor photographed everything. Every faded ink line, every top-secret stamp, every coordinate. Terentiev sat silently by the window, watching the city below, oblivious that history was being rewritten in a dusty room on the 5th floor. When Igor finished, Terentiev pulled out one last folder, his personal archive, a lifetime of forbidden research. Inside was a list, 127 locations. Object 1, the Stone City, Igor's discovery. Object 2, the Pillars, 50 kilometers east. Object 3, the Underground, 70 kilometers south. The list went on, covering 2 million square kilometers from the Arctic Circle to Kazakhstan. Terentiev laid a transparency over a modern map. The sites weren't random. They formed a geometric grid, triangles, rhombuses, hexagons, a unified, planned network. It wasn't just a civilization, Igor whispered. It was a state. Terentiev pointed to the center of the web. Object 54. Coordinates 55 degrees north, 63 degrees east. Description: megalithic capital, surpassing all others in size. The documents from 1780 call it the Stone Capital, Terentiev said. If there are answers, they are there. When can we go? Igor asked. Terentiev checked the calendar. August 22nd. Winter comes early in the north. We have 10 days before the snow buries everything. He looked at his shaking hands. I'll go with you. It's time I saw it with my own eyes. 3 days later, on August 25, 2007, a battered Mi-8 helicopter lifted off from Yekaterinburg. On board were 5 men: Igor, his assistants Sergei and Andrei, old Rybin, who refused to be left behind, and Terentiev, clutching his 1792 map like a holy relic. Below them, the modern world faded into a toy set, replaced by the endless green ocean of the taiga.
Igor sat with a mysterious black disk in his lap. The cold metal radiated through his pants. He looked at the symbols: circle, rays, spirals. Was it a map of the capital they were flying toward? 2 hours later, the pilot, a veteran named Krasnov, pointed down. There, jutting out of the green forest like jagged teeth, were gray rocks. But they weren't natural. They were too straight. The helicopter touched down in a swampy clearing 3 kilometers from the target. The engines cut and silence slammed into them. Just the wind and the smell of pine. "I'll be back in 12 days, Krasnov shouted over the fading rotor wash. "Radio check every night at 8 p.m. Then he was gone. They were alone. Igor checked the GPS. Azimuth 42 degrees. They marched into the thick forest. The terrain was brutal. Swamps that socked at their boots, roots that tripped them at every step. Rybin wheezed, his face red, but he pushed on. "I'm fine," he growled. "Just keep moving." At 1:45 p.m., they hit a steep slope. Through the pine trees, Igor saw something gray. He raised his binoculars. His breath caught. It wasn't a cliff. It was a wall. A massive, artificial fortification, rising 25 meters high and stretching 300 meters through the forest. Giant granite blocks stacked in perfect rows. "The capital," Terentiev whispered, tears in his eyes. "We found it." They scrambled up the slope. Up close, the wall was overwhelming. The blocks were smooth, polished, fitted so tightly a needle couldn't pass between them. Each one weighed at least 150 tons. No mortar, just gravity and impossible precision. They found a breach where part of the wall had collapsed and climbed through. On the other side lay a plateau and a dead city. It stretched for a mile and a half. Rows of stone foundations jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Streets paved with massive slabs ran in cardinal directions. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, just the wind whistling through the ruins of a lost empire. They walked down the main avenue, 12 meters wide, paved with 2-meter slabs. On either side were the ghosts of buildings, foundations measuring 30 by 40 meters, some with walls still standing 5 meters high. Doorways, windows, niches, all cut with machine precision. Andrew climbed onto a foundation. "Look at this," he yelled. "Square sockets cut into the corners, likely for columns or energy receivers." Igor photographed everything, every block, every angle. This was irrefutable proof. Terentiev was sketching furiously, mapping the city as they walked. 500 meters in, the avenue opened up into a central plaza. It was colossal, 200 by 300 meters of paved stone. In the center rose a pyramid-like platform, 50 meters square and 8 meters high. 24 broad steps led to the top. They climbed them in a trance. At the top stood a single round pedestal, 10 meters wide. It was empty, but the surface was covered in engravings. Igor gasped. It was the same pattern. Circles, triangles, spirals. He pulled the black disc from his pack and placed it on the pedestal. It was a perfect match. "It's a schematic," Terentiev realized, tracing the lines on the stone. "The central circle is this plaza. The rays are the avenues. The triangles are the city gates. The spirals, those are the residential districts." The city wasn't just built, it was designed like a circuit board, a radial system of geometric perfection. Reiben sat down heavily on the edge of the pedestal, clutching his chest. His face was gray. "We need to set up camp," Terentiev said, worried. "Let's go back to the wall." But as they turned to leave, Igor noticed something else. The lines on the pedestal didn't just show the city, they continued off the edge, pointing toward the mountains in the distance. And right there, carved into the granite rim, was a symbol he recognized from the forbidden archives. A symbol that shouldn't exist in the Urals. A symbol that meant energy source. "Wait," Igor said. "Look at this." He pointed to a depression in the center of the pedestal. It was hexagonal, about the size of a fist, and inside, deep in the stone, something was glimmering, a faint, pulsing blue light. "Is that active?" Andrew whispered. Igor reached down. The air above the hole was vibrating. It was warm. In the dead city for 7,000 years, in a frozen wilderness, something down there was still running. "We have to open it," Reiben wheezed, standing up, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "I need to see it all," he wheezed. "I can rest when I'm dead." They descended from the central pyramid and scanned the plaza. 3 smaller pedestals stood at the corners, each 6 meters wide. On one, a massive metal disc half a meter across, was still embedded in the stone. Sergei swept a metal detector over the ground. The device screamed. The readings went off the scale. "There's something under us," Sergei yelled. "A massive amount of metal."
They chose a spot at the edge of the square and started digging. 2 meters down, they hit it. A network of pipes, 15 centimeters thick, made of the same greenish-black alloy. It wasn't just a pipe, it was a grid, branching out like veins under the city's skin. Was this water, sewage, or power? Andrew touched the exposed metal and yanked his hand back with a yelp. "It's freezing." The air was 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The pipe was 26 degrees. Igor stared at the thermometer in disbelief. "It's actively cooling itself," Terentiev realized. 7,000 years later, without a power source, this system is still fighting entropy. Rybin nodded weakly. "I saw this in '62. Polar Urals. A rod in the permafrost, colder than the ice. The KGB took it, said it was strategic material." Igor broke off a small fragment of the pipe for analysis, another piece of impossible evidence. That night, they camped on the square. Rybin went to sleep early, his breathing shallow and ragged. Terentiev was worried, but the old geologist waved him off. Igor lay awake in his tent, listening to the wind howl through the dead city. Who built this? Why did they vanish? And why was the technology still active? The next morning, August 26th, silence hung over the camp. Terentiev went to wake Rybin. He came out a minute later, his face gray. He's gone. Alexei Rybin died in his sleep. Heart failure. He was 72. He had spent his entire life hunting for the truth of the Urals, and he died right in the center of it. Mission accomplished. They buried him at the edge of the plaza, under a simple stone cairn carved with his name. He found what he was looking for, Terentiev said, his voice trembling. They stood in silence as the wind rustled the pines. But they had to finish, for Rybin. They spent the next 2 days mapping the entire city, 138 foundations, 5 plazas, 12 main streets. On the northern edge, they found a circular pit, 50 meters wide and 20 deep, lined with granite. At the bottom was a square shaft plunging into the darkness. They dropped a stone, 7 seconds, depth at least 200 meters. The underground, Terentiev said, just like the 18th century maps said, chambers beneath the earth. It was too dangerous to descend without climbing gear, so they marked it for a future team. On August 29th, Terentiev collapsed. High fever, 38 degrees Celsius. They radioed the pilot, Krasnov. He would arrive the next morning. Terentiev grabbed Igor's arm. "You stay," he insisted. "Finish the survey. The world needs to know." The helicopter took Terentiev away the next morning. Igor handed him a flash drive with backups of everything. "If something happens to us," Igor said, "release it." Now it was just 3 of them, Igor, Sergei, and Andrew, alone in a city of ghosts. For 3 days they worked like machines. They found 12 more artifacts, tools, gears, discs, all made of the same impossible cold alloy. Then, at noon, on September 2nd, the city woke up. Igor was standing on the central pyramid when the air suddenly shimmered like a heat mirage, but it was cold. A low subsonic hum began to rise from the ground, vibrating through the soles of his boots.
The stone pedestal shook violently. Sergei screamed from the edge of the plaza, pointing north toward the deep shaft. A beam of pale, cold green light shot out of the underground tunnel, pulsing into the sky. The hum grew deafening, turning into a high-pitched ringing that brought Igor to his knees. His vision blurred, the vibration rattled his teeth, and then, snap, it stopped. The light vanished, the hum died. Silence returned. Igor gasped for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What was that?" Andrew yelled. Igor shook his head. "I don't know, but the machine, it's still running. After thousands of years, it's still running." Terrified and awestruck, they radioed for extraction. A storm was coming. On September 3rd, they packed up the camp. Igor placed one last stone on Rybin's grave and whispered, "Thank you." The helicopter ride back was a blur. Igor clutched his backpack. Inside were the discs, the samples, the undeniable proof of a lost civilization. Back in Yekaterinburg, Terentiev met them. He looked better. He said, "I've set it up. Press conference on September 10th. Journalists, historians, everyone, we're going public." But the system fights back. On September 7th, Igor got a call. A man from the regional administration wanted to meet. He was polite, wearing a suit that cost more than Igor's car. "This is a significant discovery, but we need to be careful. Panic, ridicule, you understand. Hand over the materials to the experts. We'll handle the official release through the Academy of Sciences." "How long?" Igor asked. "A year, maybe 2. Procedures." "No," Igor said. "We go public on the 10th. The man's smile vanished. "I wouldn't recommend that. There could be legal problems. You were digging in a nature reserve without a permit. That's a felony." Igor walked out. He thought he was calling their bluff. He was wrong.
At 9 p.m. that night, his doorbell rang. Police. A search warrant for illegal mining activities. They didn't ask questions. They tore the apartment apart. For 3 hours, they methodically seized everything. Flash drives, hard drives, cameras, field journals, the metal samples, the black discs. Every scrap of physical evidence was bagged, tagged, and carried away. Igor stood in his ruined living room, watching his life's work disappear into the back of a police van. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his kitchen, realizing that Rybin and Terentiev were right. The censorship machine that erased the Stone City in 1821, in 1938, and in 1947 was still working perfectly in 2007. The next morning, he called Terentiev. "They took everything," Igor said, his voice hollow. "The press conference is cancelled. The venue suddenly has technical issues. It's over." There was a long silence on the line. Then Terentiev chuckled softly. "It's not over, Igor. We haven't lost." "What do you mean? They have the proof." "They have the originals," Terentiev said. "But the night before the raid, I made digital copies of everything. The photos, the maps, the analysis reports. I emailed them to 20 independent researchers, journalists, and historians in Russia, Europe, and the US. It's already on the forums, it's on the blogs, it's in the cloud. They can raid your house, but they can't raid the internet." Igor felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. Rybin didn't die for nothing. 2 years later, October 2009, Igor sits in his office, watching the autumn rain streak the window. On his desk lies a book, fresh from the printer. The title, The Forgotten Civilization of the Urals. Authors, Igor Belov and Stanislav Terentiev. Print run, 3,000 copies. It contains everything. The coordinates of the capital, 55 degrees north, 63 degrees east. The photos of the laser-cut blocks. The chemical analysis of the impossible alloy. The 1792 maps. Mainstream science is still silent. The official archaeologists refuse to comment, pretending the book doesn't exist. But the coordinates are public now. Independent expeditions are already trekking into the taiga. They are finding the walls. They are filming the ruins. They are confirming the truth. A massive, advanced state existed in the Urals and Siberia. It built a network of 127 cities. It possessed energy technologies we are only dreaming of. And despite 2 centuries of suppression, the truth is finally out. We are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. And looking at those cold, pulsing ruins in the north, we probably won't be the last. Go to Google Earth, type in the coordinates, look for yourself. Because the history they taught you in school is only half the story. The rest is buried under the ice, waiting for you to find it. Then they vanished, gone. Was it a cataclysm? A global war? A plague? We simply don't know. Igor unlocks a false bottom in his desk drawer. He reaches to the back and pulls out a heavy, dark object. The police took the hard drives. They took the samples, but they missed this, the very first disk. He holds it in his hands, feeling that familiar, unnatural chill biting into his skin. The symbols are mysterious, their meaning lost to time, but the object itself is undeniable physical proof. 7,200 years old, and aerospace titanium alloy, laser engraving, impossible thermodynamics. Someone created this. Someone lived here, processed millions of tons of granite, laid power grids, and ruled a vast empire. And then they left or died, leaving their cities to be swallowed by the taiga and erased from the history books. But the memory didn't die. It survived in the stones, in the metal, in the forbidden maps hidden in deep archives, and in the few brave souls willing to look for it. Igor puts the disk back and walks to the window, watching the autumn rain wash over the modern city. Far to the north, under the gray sky, the capital still stands, a dead stone metropolis waiting for the world to wake up, to dig it out and to listen. And in the central square, under a rough cairn of rocks, lies Alexei Rybin, the geologist who spent a lifetime searching for the truth and finally found his rest in the heart of the mystery. He is the city's last citizen. Igor turns from the window, sits at his desk, and opens a blank document on his laptop. He begins to type. Another article. Another flare sent up in the dark. Because sooner or later, the dam will break. The truth is like water. It always finds a way out, no matter how hard they try to contain it. The Urals remember. The stones remember. And now, so do you.